Hello. If you want to measure and test or to stress load your application, there's a very powerful tool called JMeter. With JMeter, you basically write scripts that can simulate several concurrent invocations of your web services. And it collects the data, and we can check the results. It collects data and it provides you statistics about performance in terms of latency and throughput. So to use the tool, you need to install JMeter, and then you just launch JMeter. Okay. And to install the JMeter, you can use the apt-get or brew. Then I'm going to illustrate this with a particular script. In the project, the scripts are in this JMeter directory below backend, and then I'm going to show one that is the dashboard one. Okay, so this is the script. The script has 3 parts, this particular script. The first part is user-defined variables. The second part is where the students do the login. Then where the teacher creates a quiz. So a teacher creates a quiz, and here the same students that have done the login there answer the quiz. Okay. And we can test this with a lot of students. In this case, this number of students is simulated, is defined as 10. So this is the user-defined variables. You can define number of students is 10. So I can test this with 10, but 10 is just to check if the script is okay. To actually measure the behavior, the load, the behavior of the system under load, I can run it with 300 students or 1,000 students. So to see if 1,000 students are answering the quiz at the same time, if the system is able to cope with the load. And another variable we define here is the number of questions that the quiz has. So we define 5, but we can just simulate quizzes that have more questions. Then you have variables that this server, port protocol, and prefix is basically the variables you define that are used in every request. So localhost, 8080, and HTTP. If you see there, we will see that there you will find this part. You will find the quizzes tutor address, and so sometimes we want to test so in the real system, so to see if the load in what is the load in the real system. So in this case, what we basically do, we just copy these to do these variables. Okay, so let's start. This is a thread group. In this case, so a thread group, it occurs, so it executes several threads in the thread group. Each thread basically represents a user, okay? And so if you have, in this case, is number of students, is simulating that concurrently at the same time, this number of students that is defined there is doing the login. We define a counter, so for each thread, basically you assign a number, so from 1 to the number of students. We will see how this is relevant here, okay, how do we need this, and then you have the student login. So student login is basically a request, so look, you use the prefix that is there, and the prefix is defined here, right? In this case, it has no prefix, okay? And then we define the server, the port, and the protocol. And we have server is localhost, the port is 8080, the protocol is HTTP. Looks that the prefix in the case of the real system or the system in production is a API. Okay. And then we do a get. So that is HTTP request is a get, and you invoke this with the create new, it's equal to true. So what are we actually invoking? We are invoking a controller. So we're invoking this alt user demo, okay? And this request parameter as the receives the create new, which is the new value, okay? So basically what happens here, you basically create, you log in, and when you log in, you create a new demo student. So what happens here is that for each invocation here, you have a different demo student, okay? So what we do next? So when you receive the answer, you need to process the answer. Why do you need to process the answer? We need to process the answer because when you do the login, you get the token, and you need to use the token in the next requests, so that you say, oh, I'm this user. So in this case, I'm this demo student. So the way you do it is that you have this JSON extractor, because you receive a JSON and you basically store in this variable. So this is a variable that you're going to use, and in this variable you are going to store it as this value. Where is this value? What is this? This is a JSON pass expression. In this case, so we receive an object and it is the token attribute of the object. So let's see it. So if you come here, we see that here it returns an alt DTO, and we'll see that alt DTO has this token attribute. Okay, so this is converted into a JSON object that has this attribute, that is token, and you get the token value. Another thing that you need to do is that actually, since you're gonna need these tokens afterwards when the student answers the quiz, basically you need this variable action needs to be exported there. So you need to store the token, because when this thread group finishes, all these variables are deleted. Okay, so you need to store it more persistently, and you do it here. So this is the bin shell post processor that is invoked after. Okay, and basically you store the token variable. Look, the token variable there in. Well, now we have a problem. You have a token variable for each student, but you want to store actually all the tokens for all the students. So what we do, and that's why you need this student counter here, the number, what we do is that we store it in this variable. And now the variable token that is going to be used in the other thread groups basically contains a suffix that is the number of the student. So we can reuse it for each different student. Okay. Then we go to the second thread group, where you basically create a quiz. So the teacher creates a quiz, and basically you need a single teacher. So we have a single thread here. Okay. So the first thing that the teacher needs to do is basically he needs to do the login. Now this is the similar part. So but this is going to be a demo teacher. Okay. And you're going to collect some information that is necessary. Again, the token, but you need also to collect basically the course ID. So let's see how do you collect the course ID from the JSON that is returned. So you need to go to this demo alt demo teacher here, the controller. So we come here and you have this alt demo teacher, and we see that it also returns alt DTO. So if you observe this alt DTO, you have the first part of it is user and then courses. So let's see. So you have user here, so is this object, and then you have courses, and courses is this map. Okay, and then what you do in the map is you assess all the elements inside the map. Okay, and you get the first one. Okay, and you get the course ID. So basically you go to this one and you get the course ID. And so the course ID will be stored in course ID. And you do something similar for the course execution ID that is also there. Okay. After you collect that, and since these are going to be necessary, the course execution ID is going to be necessary in this thread group. you store it, okay, in this variable, okay, to be used by the students when the students do the request. And now, what happens here? Well, what happens here, we have basically a loop controller that does a single invocation in this case, and I define a HTTP header manager. This HTTP header manager defines what's going to be in the header, and in this case, all the requests that are inside will use this header. And look, we are using the teacher token. So the teacher token, it's here, okay, that was collected here, extracted here, and we have it is here in the header. And now every time we do an invocation, and then I do this invocation for another loop for the number of questions, so we are going to create as many questions as it is defined in these user-defined variables, and we are going to do the request, okay, and I have a counter there, and when we do the request, we use the course ID there, okay, and look that we have we are using in the body of the request the question number. Look there. Is this counter? And this counter is defined here. Okay. So it counts for each different question. So basically we can identify the different question numbers. Okay. The different questions. How is this? What this refers, this body data in this request? This is the post, and if I go to the controllers, and if I see the course execution, the question controller, I have the create question here. And in this create question, I receive a request body, which is this question DTO. So this question DTO is actually what is being sent there. Okay. So when I create a question, I need to receive a question DTO to create it. So if you want, you can check that the values inside here are actually what is expected in this DTO. So this is how JSON is converted into a Java object. Okay, and this is the information that is received in this question controller. Okay. And then at the end we are going to collect the question IDs. Why? Look, these create question is going to return a question DTO as well. So it receives a question DTO and it returns the question DTO. Why it returns the question DTO? Because we need the ID of the object that is stored in the database, because afterwards you need to use the ID. So basically, in this case, this question DTO ID, okay, that look, is not sent. So when you do the invocation, we do not send ID. The ID is null, but is null there. But when you finish, you want to store it. And again, you want to store it in different variables, because we have, for instance, 5 questions. You want to have the ID of each question. So that's why you use again the question counter there. Okay. Finally, you create a quiz. So how do you create a quiz? It's very simple. Again, it's a post. We send the request here. Okay, it's to create a quiz. So it's basically you are invoking this controller. What is in this controller? Basically the create quiz here. And as you see in the create quiz, you receive a request body that it is the quiz DTO. Okay, so the quiz DTO contains this information. Okay, the quiz DTO and this is the information you send in the quiz DTO. What is new here is this variable. What is this variable? Basically, you want to, when you create the quiz, you want to include information about the questions, but you receive the questions there, so you need to process them. You receive when you create the question, you receive the information there. So you have a pin shell preprocessor that is executed before the invocation, basically to define this variable, okay? This variable here. And what you do there, you basically have this small script that for the number of questions, okay, you receive the number of questions in this variable, okay? And for the number of questions, you basically create the part of the DTO that is referred to the question. And again, this is the secret part, or the interesting part. You define the question ID plus a number of questions, because you get the question IDs here with this number, okay? And then you use them here to generate the question, okay? And then again, when you receive, you need to store the question ID, okay? Because the question ID is going to be used by the student when the student going to answer. And again, you need to store the question ID in a variable, in a property to be used here. So this is the student part, the teacher part answering. Finally, the student answers. So the student to answer, you need to use the token, right? So the first thing you need to do is basically to reuse the tokens that were collected there. And to do it, you use a student counter, because you're going to invoke this for the number of students. So the number of threads, each thread represents a different student. And for each student here, we defined a different header. And the header contains here the token, but now the token is collected with the number of the student, because the token was stored there with the number of the student. So that way, in here, each different thread that represents a different student uses the different token, okay? And then it's pretty similar. You start a quiz. So in this case, use the quiz property, look, that was collected there, okay, here, and stored there. And what you do, so there's no, what you do here when you start the quiz is that you're gonna collect. So when you start the quiz, we can see here, so when you start in the quiz controller, when you start a quiz, where is this? Let me check. So it's not here, is in the answers controller. When you start the quiz, you return a statement quiz DTO, okay? And in this statement quiz DTO, it contains basically all the questions and all the possible options that you can answer, because you're gonna, okay, choose one option when you answer. What is nice here is that we are going to prepare, because then the student is going to conclude the quiz, you're going to pick different options for the different students. So what we're going to say is that we're going to define a random variable here from 0 to 3. Why 0 to 3? Because basically the questions we defined have 4 options. So, and we're going to pick randomly one option for each different student. How do we do it? Well, first I go to the result of the quiz start, and I get the quiz answer ID, okay, with this pass expression, and then I ask the question answers IDs, and look what is different here. I use the wildcard there, okay, because it's gonna pick all the question answer IDs, and it's gonna give a different number for each one of them, okay. So actually will be 5, okay. Oh, it will be related with the number of questions, because it will be as many answers as many questions. And the same for the quiz question ID here, okay. And then we start and we get the options the question IDs here as well. And that's the nice part where, look, we're going to get the option ID, but which option ID I'm going to pick for this particular student. So there are 4 possibilities. We are going to use the value that was generated from this random variable there. So we're going to pick for all the questions, and then for each one of them, so we're going to generate here option ID is equal to the number of questions the quiz has, but then you're going to pick each one of the 4. Okay, each student will pick a different one. These variables that are collected here will be used afterwards to define my final submission or the student final submission of the quiz. And here we use again in this is the body. So when I conclude the quiz, I send again a request body, so a JSON object, and the hard part is this variable answers. So these answers are different depending on the student. And here we have a bin shell preprocessor that basically does it and creates that answers. And in this part is the option ID number, and this actually option ID number of option, and this variable will contain different values depending on the student because of the random there. And finally, when you do this invocation, the student answers the quiz, and because of the number of threads, we can do this with we can simulate 1,000 students in parallel answering the quiz. Okay, that's it. Thank you.